Okay, now for our author. Jill McCorkle is the author of 8 previous books, 5 of which have been selected as New York Times notable books. She is the winner of the New England Book Award and the North Carolina Award for Literature, among others. 2 of her stories, found in Going Away Shoes, were included in the Best American Short Story series. Jill teaches writing at North Carolina State University and lives in Hillsborough, North Carolina. Please help me welcome Jill McCorkle.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thanks for coming out. I thought I would just start by talking a little bit about the collection and how the stories came to be. There's almost always a story behind a story, and then I'll read a little, and I would love to entertain questions. The epigraph for this book is Gloria Steinem's wonderful quote, "If the shoe doesn't fit, must we change the foot?" And I think that what the characters in my stories in this collection all share is the discovery that their own feet are just fine and they're learning to stand on them as best they can and move around, some more successful than others. I've always been drawn to those lost shoes, like you're driving along and your eye catches this single shoe by the side of the road, or that lone glove in a stairwell. And I've always found it to be a kind of a sad sighting, you know, and you think, well, there must be a story there. And so I know I had that in mind, and then that fed the title story, Going Away Shoes, which is about a young woman who, by way of having always done the right thing, maybe has done the wrong thing, sort of too much right equals wrong. She has done everything needed for her family, and now she's middle-aged and her sisters are off having their lives, and she's the one sitting there with their mother at the end of her life. And her mother is someone who collected shoes and sort of had a whole museum of them, you know. So all these shoe boxes that are labeled Cotillion 1950, her wedding shoes, and of course her going away shoes. And these sisters through the years have played with the shoes. So it's kind of my funky contemporary version of Cinderella, because they've all spent time growing up trying on the shoes. And of course my character Debbie is now at a point in life where she's looking back only to realize she pretty much missed her chances to go to the ball. And so she's there working. Her job is as a travel writer for the local paper, though she has never traveled at all. She knows what she knows by way of books and movies. And so the editor of the paper keeps trying to get her to write about things like Tweetsie Railroad and Myrtle Beach. And her eye is drawn much more often to more serious topics. And in this story, she goes to great length describing that very moving exhibit in the Holocaust Museum, the Mountain of Found Shoes. And when I had her describing that exhibit, it suddenly occurred to me that that really worked as a metaphor for so many of these characters, because they are mateless. They are people whose journey, the journey they thought they were on, was stopped very suddenly. And for whatever reason, they've been thrown onto a new path. And so when I had that in mind, then the shoe metaphor really grew and continued to the final story, Me and Bigfoot, which I'm going to read. It's a pretty short story in the collection, so I may be able to read the whole thing. But that's the other end of the spectrum, where pretty much a woman creates the prints to fill the shoes. And so it's the other extreme. But all along the way, there are a lot of different situations of people starting over. There's a story called P.S., where a woman years later has written a letter to the marriage counselor to tell him all the things he did not pick up on or get right. And there's a woman in Happy Accidents who's obsessed with the TV PBS painter Bob Ross. Joy of Painting, who I think of as kind of the Mr. Rogers for grown-ups, you know, this sweet, peaceful voice. And he lets you know how, you know, any mistake is a happy accident. You can take a big blob of paint and turn it into something beautiful. And so this woman has chosen that as her philosophy of life. You know, I can take myself and turn me into something good. There's another story, Magic Words, where a woman is on the verge of an affair and starts out to go meet the person, and then many things happen along the way, and it's with one choice of stopping to help a kid who's in trouble, everything sort of unravels and blows the other way. So there are a lot of stories where, as I said, the journey that is begun is never completed. Something totally different happens. My favorite, I'll say for me as a writer, my ideas come from all over the place. I'm big on taking notes and grabbing bits and pieces of a story when I see it, never knowing quite what it will become. And the story in this collection I like to talk about in that vein is one called Surrender. And here's the reality. Once, many years ago, I was invited to teach at the Bennington Writers Program in Bennington, Vermont. My children were very young, so the only way I could take the job was to take my children. The only way I could take my children was to take my mother. So I'm there, and like an hour in, word gets out that I have this built-in grandmother. So other writers began to deposit their children. And so I go to check on my mom, and I walk in, and this adorable little girl, I'm not sure to this day who she belonged to, with this pixie haircut and this kind of ferocious looking expression, had just set up shop with a ream of paper, and she had drawn picture after picture of what she thought my mother would look like naked, in great detail. And the exhibit just was everywhere. And so I go to the door, and my mother, who I think would be fine with me saying is kind of the epitome of the church lady. Like, I get in the door, and she grabs me, and she's like, "You have to make her stop." And of course, I always tell people my first response was that I was filled with admiration, because she had done in 1 hour what I had been trying to do my whole life. She was totally in charge, you know. And I never got over that. But that's an anecdote, you know. And as I tell my students, we witness, we encounter, we have those anecdotes everywhere in life. But it doesn't constitute a short story. What it often does is it fills in the background. It creates a real full-bodied life of the character you're moving around. And so flash forward many years later, I was writing a story about a woman who has invested her whole life in her son, only to have that terrible twist of fate occur where he has died young. And here she is. She never accepted the young wife who she thought was not good enough for him. And all that's left of him is this little girl. And the grandmother does not want to love her. And the little girl is desperate for love. And I was having the hardest time writing that story because it was so depressing and sad. And it was one of those I kept just, I would hit a wall and stop. And I'd go take a walk and come back. And one of those days when I stopped to take a walk, I thought, I'll give that little girl some paper and some Sharpies. And suddenly she began drawing pictures of her grandmother naked. And suddenly, as a writer, I had many ways to hand off the story. Descriptions of the artwork, just the physical texture of the Sharpies and the paper and all that was involved. I had comic relief to balance what was this very difficult situation. And suddenly, the story worked. I'm a writer who believes that you really have to wait sometimes to find the right pieces that make a story work. Rarely do you have an idea for a story that's a whole lot, or rarely do I'll speak for myself, have an idea for a story that's whole and complete and there. Usually I'm just writing some small aspect of it and then waiting to see what else comes in and pulling from notes, many, many notes that I have. One that I have loved recently that I have not used yet, and about a year or so ago, I was in a store and the woman behind the cash register said to me, "The humility has been awful lately." And I said, the humility. I said, "You're right, the humility has been terrible for a very long time." And of course, I couldn't wait to get out to my car to take down the note, thinking, okay, I don't know whose mouth this will come out of, but eventually there will be a home for this line, to create some kind of break in the tension. Years before, I had a character who announced at a very difficult moment where you're really feeling sorry for her and it's kind of painful, and she tells a group gathered in her neighborhood that she's going to have her yard sodomized. And comic relief. I had stored that one up. I thought of that one. I had that saved for a long, long time. So a lot of those bits and pieces I just keep and file them away, waiting to see how the story grows, develops. I tell my students that a good short story should resemble a good juggling act. And if you stand in the center of a room and you just toss a ball up and down, that's not much of a feat. But you bring in the second ball and it's still pretty predictable where it's going to land, but you add that third one and suddenly you have surprise. And so for myself, I'm always looking for the way these different parts might come together and intersect. Now I'm going to read to you what is one of the shortest stories in the collection, and I think I can shave it just right to have plenty of time. It's called Me and Bigfoot, and here's what led this story to grow. I was living in New England. I walk every day, and there it meant walking in the snow a lot, and one day I happened to notice there was this truck parked with no license tags on it. And it was there for a few days, and then it was gone. And I have no idea what happened to it. So that was one thing I saw in my day. The other thing that was on my mind at the time, well, two things. One is, people trying to set you up, and everybody knows the perfect date because I was single at the time. And my other idea, as a result of being single at the time, is I had the thought that what would be a really good, cheap security system, because my dog was a big, fat, sweet, old Labrador retriever, so she was not a watchdog. So I thought, what would be a good security system? Cheap. So I thought, well, you could go buy like some size 16 hunting boots and just put outside your door. And maybe get the sheath of a great big knife and lean that against them. So that's what I was thinking about. And I, of course, was thinking about shoes, and how a contemporary Cinderella might decide to fill those shoes herself first, knowing that that's where the real happiness might emerge. So this is the result, me and Bigfoot. It is snowing, a freak blinding storm that likely will shut things down for days. Thank God. Just last night, under a clear winter sky, I had wished for a sign, or at least some kind of divine intervention from the matchmakers of the world. All those well-meaning friends who are far more upset over my single status than I am. They drop by unannounced to offer me comfort and advice and descriptions of various men as if they are hot entrees on a silver platter. Now I look out my window to see a very large foreign object out there in the blowing snow. A big white rusty truck parked in my side yard. I put on my heavy coat and boots and go out there, circle it a few times. There are no tire tracks leading in or footprints leading out. No license plate or inspection sticker. The front bumper is a 2x4. A wet note pinned on a coffee-stained napkin is under the wiper. You, owner of the little scrappy dog, please don't tow or complain. I need you, please. I'll be back soon. I tug open the heavy iced-over door and climb up into the cab. As soon as I close myself in, all windows glazed in ice, I have the strangest feeling that I've been here before. I'm not a complainer, I imagine telling him, and I hate to be around one. No key, only a flashlight and lighter in the glove compartment, a pair of gloves on the dash, the thumbs cut out, palms stiff with resin and dirt. I sit there in the cab, stretch my legs, and feel an odd sense of comfort and warmth. The truck smells of mildew and wood smoke. The floorboard is frozen and the seats are damp and frosted as if he'd driven off-road through the swamp. A thick-lipped coffee mug is wedged into the open ashtray and I run my fingers around the smooth-stained rim. Behind the seat, there's a big pair of hunting boots covered in red mud. I reach my hands down into those tall, sturdy boots and feel the worn, thick wool, my body heat slowly absorbed and held there. I need you. Had he walked up to my door? Please. If so, he might have seen me through the shears, painting my toenails and talking to my friend Sophie, telling her yet again about how I am not going to the swinging singles sing-along at her church. She's married, happily, she says, but has made me her project. If he'd waited, he might even have heard me there under the sky saying those same words, please, I need you, to the powers of the great beyond. I don't know what it is about a person alone that drives other people crazy. I'm thinking we all heard too many Bible stories coming along. Adam and Eve, that match made in heaven. Or Noah's Ark, desperate pairs scurrying onto the love boat. A lesson reinforced by that Irish song we sang to death in grade school about the poor unicorn left crying on a rock because he didn't find somebody he wanted to live with for all eternity. What's more, people seem to really hate it if you say you're happy alone. It makes Sophie so uncomfortable, in fact, that I finally confessed to her that of course I had a dream of my perfect match, but that I also would rather live alone than opt for just any old body who slid up next to me and took root. I talked fast so she wouldn't think I was referring to Kyle, who she married in great haste after only 3 months. I went on to say that even in my most ideal dream match, I would still require a lot of solitary time with limited interruptions from friends and family. I said this very directly, since she drops by unannounced all the time and has implied several times that both my house and person need an extreme makeover. She said my bedroom was abominable, that it looked like a cheap motel, and that my clothes were too bad to even give away. Especially the olive green velvet dress I wore to their Christmas party, especially since it was cold and I was bare-legged. Well, thank you, I said, hoping to hurry her along, but she was hell-bent on connecting my poor fashion sense to the breakup with Scott months ago, even though I have explained many times over that we broke up because I said I would never marry him and his biological clock was ticking. I could not marry him, not now and not ever. We had nothing in common, and the fact that I had trouble listening to what he was saying was proof enough that it would be a mistake. And why is that so hard to understand? Why do these people look out there and say, hetero and hetero, get on the boat and go? What? You both need to breathe to stay alive? That's great, amazing. Now get on the boat and go. And you say, but I'm not the least bit attracted to that person. I hate his politics, the way he chews, the way he finishes my sentence as I'm speaking it. I can't stand anything worse than a spoiled white boy trying to sound and act like he grew up in the ghetto or a trailer park. That was Scott in a nutshell. Privileged gangsta wannabe, driving a Hummer and canceling my vote every time. I say, I cannot live like that. I'm better off alone. And people like Sophie, as if deaf to all else, will say, but he has such a good job. And yes, there's a perfect man in my mind, and he's always been there, nameless, faceless, self-sufficient, and therefore free from all societal entrapments, and most important, more loyal than any dog, as he remains fiercely rooted in my life. Does he exist? I want to believe that, like all the great abstractions, he might, that with the right angle of the sun or direction of the wind, he could. And now as I sit in this frozen white truck, my warm breath trapped against my mouth by the wool of my scarf, it is like he is here, sitting right there in the passenger seat in his big tall boots, his hands surprisingly smooth for someone so outdoorsy. I close my eyes and he's there. I can smell and taste him, feel his hands pulling me close, and it's like every little pheromone and hormone in my body is waking after a long hibernation. A million little Rip Van Winkles eager to make up for a lot of lost time. I have what is called a major out-of-body experience, and no one could be more surprised than I am. And I go inside feeling like a new woman. I look in the mirror and I'm younger, more alive looking than I've ever been. When Sophie calls, I tell her I'm snowed in with a visiting friend that knows she's never met him. Yes, I've known him forever. That I'm hoping he will stay a few days and I'll call later. I go and get his big nasty boots and put them by my front door. So when the storm ends, it will look like we never left the house. I put on some music, light candles, build a fire. The snow has quieted everything. The power is out, the phone doesn't ring. My whole world pauses. Who is he? Sophie asked after a week, the truck still parked there. She's at my front door in bright yellow ski gear, even though little snow remains, and I motion for her to be quiet. Still sleeping, I say, and point to my closed bedroom door. He loves my bedroom. I can hardly get him to leave it. She gives me a skeptical look, starts to speak, but catches herself. I whisper over coffee in the kitchen. I tell her all about him, his slow, gentle movements and ability to sense my needs and wants before I even speak. I tell her how we're reading things aloud at night, funny columns that make us laugh, political ones that make us mad, poetry that breaks our hearts. How we are working to train little Curly so he will fetch something other than what's in the cat's litter box. It all sounds so wonderful, I can hardly believe it myself. The truck is still here when the crocuses surface, and I like to think this can go on forever. I've gotten so comfortable with it all, the questions, the stories. Oh, we just love to cook and sit by the fire, take long walks, watch lots of old movies. Sophie says everyone has noticed how I often look glassy-eyed and rumpled, like someone just rolled from the bed, that one day she would have sworn I had a hickey, which really did shock her. I laughed and blushed for real because sometimes before going to the store or any place I might see people, I do pinch my neck and roll around and rub against the indoor-outdoor carpet on my stairs. I have to confess I kind of like the way it feels there on all fours. So primal and earthy, like an animal following a scent. Sometimes I start laughing and can't stop. The cat thinks I'm making fun of him and swishes off into another room. Word is out that my man is kind of antisocial. The talkers tell how he always has been a little bit of a loner. And with good reason, he's wanted everywhere he goes. His advice, his expertise, his big strong body and intellect and winning ways. Besides, he's an archaeologist out there digging around in the forest and riverbanks while they're sleeping. He's nocturnal, I say, and there are certainly worse things. Full spring, and I never tire of closing my eyes and seeing him there. He's the best man I've ever known. He never mentions if my legs are prickly or toenail polish chipped or if I look plump or my breath smells of brie or garlic. He doesn't care that I don't have much money and I'm not ready to have a kid, that I eat snacks in bed and keep the house cold year-round so I can wear layers and pile up quilts and blankets. He doesn't care that my bedroom looks like the Days Inn. In fact, because we're so much alike, he likes it. And he loves that green dress of mine, thinks it's the sexiest thing I own. He sometimes likes for me to wear it while I clean his big dirty boots, and he washes the dishes and changes the sheets. He likes 400 count sheets, which is a little contradiction about him that I just adore. We would rather have soft sheets than shoes. And of course, because he's that way, it makes me want to please him even more, to be as desirable as I can be. And there's the difference, desire. My man was created in my image and then roughed up in a way I find attractive. He is me, only big, hairy, forceful. He's the man I'd want to be. At night when I get there under my warm quilts piled high like a cave, I'm waiting for him to return. The anticipation of his arrival is all I need. By April, no one believes that anyone can be so perfect. So I give him seasonal allergies and a big white car wreck scar on his clavicle. I give him a childhood just unhappy enough to develop his artistic sensitivity and compassion. I give him a sweet, early heartache that keeps him romantic and longing to recreate a pure and perfect love. Though health conscious and in really great shape, he does love the occasional smoke, good bourbon, and pork any way he can get it. You are a phenomenon of the first degree, I whisper to him as I fall asleep. I say, you are a giant of a man, a magical and mythical wonder. I call him Sass and Skookum, Yeti, Momo, Yowie. He just calls me baby or sweetheart, which out of his mouth is like nothing I've ever heard. Friends have begun to see him and report to one another. It's a competition like Where's Waldo or an Elvis sighting. He's a local legend by now. He's been seen several times on the riverbank, a man nearly 7 feet tall with a stringer of enough fish to feed the whole county. They were delicious too, I say. He used a recipe he made up himself that was once published in Gourmet magazine. One person saw him at Food City with 2 cases of wine and a huge whole ham hoisted up on one shoulder. He talked to her and told her that the 2 of us would be having a big party one of these days soon, probably after his next expedition to the Arctic. Another saw him at Dainty Pat's Pastries buying little fruit tarts. He held the door open for that mean elderly man no one in town likes, and then shared a laugh with her. She said he asked her for coffee so he'd get to know some of my friends better, but she just didn't have time. He's sexy, all right, she said to me, and it made me feel good but also really mad. I wanted to tell her to find her own man. When I get tired of all the sightings, I send them on a big dig for a month, and then I tell them all about our last night together. People, including Sophie, think I'm so lucky in love they're contemplating a change in wardrobe and bedroom furniture. Well, of course you're fine alone now, they say. You're waiting for him. But today I come home from the store, my bag filled with wine and roses and those big sea scallops he loves to saute in butter, and the truck is gone. There's a note on my door penned in a hasty scrawl, "Thanks for not calling the cops." My heart sinks as if I've been abandoned, as if I will never see him again. And then I remember that of course he'll be back. What's more, he's left his boots there by my front door, clean, ready, and waiting for his return. So that's me and Bigfoot. Thank you. And I'll pause here to see if there are any questions. I can go either way. I could give you a sampling from something of a very different tone, but I also don't want to miss the opportunity for questions if you have any.
Is that based on a real life story?
Only in that I thought this would be a great, cheap security system, you know. Just let people think you have this giant of a man living in your house. But instead I got another dog and a memorable book signing experience. Well, I have many memorable. I think the ones that often stick out in your mind are the ones where nobody comes, you know, or it's like you and the barista, is that the word, at like, you know, making coffee while you're reading. I once had a reading and the only people there was my star student at the time, was just this wonderful person, and her lovely parents and grandfather had come to my reading, and we were the only ones there. But my best reading story is the one where nobody at all came, and it was my very first signing, and it was the very first time Nancy Olson at Quail Ridge Books in Raleigh, and now that's a huge independent bookstore, one of the biggest in the whole country. But my first books had just come out. This was 1984. She started a store in Raleigh, and she said, "If I have a signing, would you come?" And I said, "Sure." So she books it. I go. She booked it on a Saturday afternoon, right during the Carolina Duke football game. And nobody came, needless to say. And Nancy and I just sat there and talked for an hour and became very dear friends. And now I have to say, when she has an author in her store, I mean, it's standing room only. But so that was certainly memorable. Well, you know what, though? It's a real tricky line there, because I never like to feel that I'm tricking the reader. And as a reader, I'm always disappointed when I feel someone has tricked me, or maybe kept something secret that should not have been kept secret. So I think that's an important question for revision. And I mean, certainly you don't want to give everything away right up front, but there's also a way that you want to tell enough that makes us interested and pulls us in. I mean, we've heard show don't tell forever, and I always find myself saying to my class, but there are many times when telling is very important, and sometimes opening a story or a novel to set the stage and let us know where we are and what the situation is really important, because then we trust that you will come back to that. Now, I revise a lot. I probably spend more time revising a short story, because I think when I'm working on a novel, I don't think of the little tweaks and revision I'm doing the whole time as it moves forward. But with the short story, I work very differently. I like to have the whole thing out on the table. And I know when I write the first draft that I'm likely putting way more information than I need, or that belongs there. And then the revision is taking the time to really pull away what doesn't belong and heighten what does. So for me, it really is like the big lump of clay and then shaping the parts. And I find working on a revision very, very satisfying. And I think a good rule for editing, again, something I cannot say enough to my students, because too much response can be really overwhelming. But I think if in your life you have 3 readers whose opinions you really trust, if any 2 of those 3 agree in a strong way or have a problem, the same problem, then I just assume I need to correct it. Otherwise, it becomes subjective. What I like for my stories to be sort of channeled into TV, you know what, is the kind of thing that I guess it would depend on what the offer is, you know. Either let me have a lot of say-so in the way it looks or pay me so much money, I just will look the other way. I don't know. I would, thank you, and thank you for reading that short story. There's certainly a lot of dialogue and action. This is a short story called Hominids, and I love to get the right first sentence, and that one is a woman who's so tired of hearing men talk about Hooters, she says she's going to open a restaurant called Peckers. And it's a pretty biting feminist piece there that I'm proud of. So anyway, I think anytime you have something that can translate to another medium, it's pretty great. I mean, I had something exciting happen this past year in that I was involved in an off-Broadway show called Good Old Girls, which was a collaborative piece, monologues from my characters and Lee Smith's characters put together with the songs of singer-songwriters Matraca Berg and Marshall Chapman. And the director, Paul Ferguson, years ago had pulled it together into this show. And so we had a little run on off-Broadway. And it's interesting because, you know, when you see your work take another shape, it is a very, it's, yikes, I hope that's not about us. No, they drove on by. But it's a unique experience because the work becomes something entirely different. And so, you know, I'm watching these really fine actors with my words coming out of their mouths, and they accent words in ways I do differently when I read it, you know. And so, you know, your ear sort of goes, whoa. And then, you know, you really appreciate this interpretation and the way it's being heard. So it was a wonderful experience for me. So, no, I haven't had much luck out there in film land, but I'd love it if it ever happened. Thank you for asking. Who are the authors who have inspired me? I would say, you know, I can name those books that you read that just blow the doors and windows open. I mean, for me, Winesburg, Ohio, by Sherwood Anderson was a book I read in college that did that. I go back again and again to The Great Gatsby. I think it's just a perfect novel. And then, you know, the touchstone of this long legacy of Southern writers. I mean, we're here at the Margaret Mitchell House, but when I need a good dialogue fix, I go straight to Tennessee Williams. And I'm just a huge fan of the short stories of Flannery O'Connor and Eudora Welty. I love Carson McCullers, another Georgian. You guys get to take credit for the early stories of Truman Capote. I mean, again, just Catherine Ann Porter. Those stories that I first read that sounded familiar to me and made me feel like this was a possible venture. My advice, you ask, I think my advice to other writers is just do it. You know, I think the more you write, the more you write. I think writing is like any other endeavor that requires your getting in shape and sticking with it and getting better. And I really think your brain just becomes sharper and more tuned in. I think it's a rare luxury to just be able to write all day or whenever you want with a big block of time. And so for me, I'm always storing up and waiting for the time to sit, but I take enormous amounts of notes every day. And I have this kind of time at the beginning of the day or the end of the day, or some days both, where I really organize those thoughts and think about the various parts. So I think you get credit for all the time you're thinking about your characters and your stories. It's not just that physical time sitting in front of the keyboard. The question is about organizing my notes, and a good one, and probably there's a better system. You know, if I have a good thought and don't write it down, it's gone, like a dream. Before my children were born, I was much better at remembering, you know, but getting weaker. And then once I had kids, it was all gone. So I take these notes, and sometimes I'm not sure where it goes. Like the humility line, you know, I have a whole drawer I think of as, I call it Pandora's box, you know, where you just see or hear these great things and stick it in, and you're not sure where it belongs. And then other times, like right now, I'm working on a novel, and there are a lot of different characters with their stories overlapping. And so I know when I'm thinking about a particular character and seeing, oh, well, that's so-and-so's line of dialogue. And so I keep all those files and as best I can, put it in the right place. And I have folders with story ideas and just storing up for those bigger blocks of time. I used to write on my steering wheel, like at a red light, and then I had somebody tell me who had worked on my car, he saw all this ink on the and he said I was going to, one of these days, have a good idea and send my airbag out. So I try not to write and drive, you know, but it's good to keep a piece of paper. It's like nothing like getting in the shower, as you all know, or that time just before you fall asleep, you know, when you have a really great idea, and you just need to write it down. And the great thing is, I'm finding this especially as I get older, that sometimes I'll come across a scene and I'm like, I get so excited because I don't even remember having thought of it. And there it is. So if I waited for the right opportunity, I would just never get the work done. I learned very early, you know, it's hard. Here's some advice for other writers. Occupational hazard. How do you explain to your friends and loved ones that what you want more than anything else is to go lock yourself in a room all by yourself and be with your own thoughts? And, you know, it's a hard thing to explain and justify, especially when your children are little. But what I learned very early is that nobody ever seems to get upset if you say you're going to the grocery store to buy dinner and good snacks. And so, a lot of my writing has been done in the parking lot of, say, Food Line or Super Stop and Shop when I lived in New England, because, you know, I would always just come home and say, oh my God, the store was so crowded. I had to wait forever. When really you might have just run in the convenience store and bought some milk. And so, you know, you just learn to write whenever you can grab the opportunity. And that's been the greatest thing I've learned as a writer, is that, you know, when I was in my early 20s and just starting, I love nothing better than the beginning of the day, and you know, you wear this bathrobe and you have this much coffee and and now it's just, you know, if I'm sitting on a bench and the cab's late, or you know, waiting in a pickup line, or I don't know, just wherever life presents a pause is time. Yeah, well, you know, I think I began writing for the same reason I began reading. You know, I love to be told a good story. I want to hear a good story. I want to tell a good story. And I think a lot of what is going on in life, or what I witness, does automatically filter in. And, you know, I think a lot of my stories are kind of girl power, so, but they always have been. You know, it's like I was on a panel a month ago or so ago about To Kill a Mockingbird, and that novel's anniversary. And people were talking about how Scout Finch, you know, so many girls identified, and I'm like, why wouldn't you? I mean, she was just beating up the boys and smart as a whip, and Atticus for a daddy. You know, I mean, she was like a real hero. And so, I mean, you know, part of it is what I came, you know, into, like, as a kid, just wanting a strong character with a lot of opinions. And then, you know, I have found through the years that I also have a lot of characters I have a lot of fun with that I think of as my alter ego characters. I mean, you know, if you grow up, you know, good girl in the South, you're kind of going to make nice a lot of times, and there's always the subtext, you know, your brain's thinking one thing, and this sweet thing comes out of your mouth. And so I love to have the character who's the alter ego of that, no filter whatsoever, and just says exactly what she's thinking when she thinks it. And I have quite a few of those, and it's just a wonderful, I mean, somebody said, you know, talked about I was, some review called me something like the queen of the rant, or, you know, something about salty rants. And I do enjoy a good rant every now and then. I don't want to do it all the time. I think a good rant every now and then clears the head for other stories to come. You've been a great audience. Thank you so much for coming out.